contractor for the working parties at the Willamette Cove project area, is going to kick off this presentation. So over to you, Josh.
Thank you, Annie. Just to give you a quick introduction of myself for those that I haven't met before, and I look forward to someday meeting in person again. Hopefully we'll be there not too long in the future. So I am with GSI Water Solutions. I am the lead engineer supporting the performing parties, which are made up of the Port of Portland, the City of Portland, and the State of Oregon. This is for the in-water remedial design. So this is we'll get into a little bit later. This is the riverbanks Willamette Cove and the in-water Willamette Cove and a little bit west of there. Not only am I lead engineer for the performing parties, I also live in Northeast Portland, roughly 3 miles from the river. So this site is a passion to me just beyond the work. Just personally, I'm really interested in what happens with this site. Excited to get to work on this and help develop the design for the site.
And hey, Josh, sorry to interrupt you. It's a little garbled, your sound is, and that's what folks are saying too. So I don't know if there's any adjustments you can make to your mic. We can hear you, it's just a little garbled.
Okay, let me see. Sometimes it kicks to a different microphone than.
Thanks for checking. Thanks for your patience, folks.
Is this better now?
Yes, much better.
Okay,
Thank you.
Sorry, it kicked to the wrong microphone. All right, so moving on to the next slide then. So the agenda for tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the remedial design activities that have been conducted to date. We're going to talk through upcoming remedial design activities, and then we'll transition to talking about the community engagement we've conducted so far within the Willamette Cove in-water project area, and then opportunities for future community involvement. Next slide. So just to refresh everybody on what the Willamette Cove project area is for the Portland Harbor Superfund site. It exists between roughly River Mile 6.8 and River Mile 6.2, so immediately down river of the railroad track bridge and upriver of the St. John's Bridge. The site is adjacent to the McCormick and Baxter in-water cap that was previously installed in roughly 2004-2005 timeframe. And it includes the riverbanks on the Willamette Cove project area, on the Willamette Cove Upland site, and it excludes the riverbanks on the Crawford Street area. However, our design will obviously mesh with any work that'll be done with the Upland parties on both of those sites. In addition, it continues to just inside or adjacent to the navigation channel within the Willamette Cove project area. And additionally, the coloring on the figure here, just to refresh people, this is from the 2017 record of decision. This was the preliminary technology assignments, as they call it. So this is what they assume will be the rough approximate work that will need to be conducted from an active remedial design standpoint, the green representing areas where future caps would likely be placed, and the yellow representing areas where dredging may occur. And typically after dredging, there's some degree of capping or placement of some final surface. Next slide, please. And I'll turn over to Dwight Leisle with the Port of Portland to cover the next couple slides.
Yeah, we're going to do a little tag team here. So from the previous slide, you saw the red line that marks the boundary of the in-water project area, but we wanted to remind everyone that Willamette Cove really has two distinct projects. There's an in-water project and an upland project. Again, my name's Dwight Leisle. I work for the Port of Portland. I have the pleasure of working on both of these projects, both the in-water and the upland. So many of you may have seen this slide before. We've used it in previous presentations, but it does identify the distinction of these two projects and the role of EPA and DEQ in each of the projects. So the top of bank separates the upland project from the in-water project. And so everything landward of the top of bank identifies the upland project. Metro and the Port of Portland are the performing parties for the upland site, which is overseen by DEQ. So everything towards the river from the top of bank, including the riverbank, the beach area, and the river sediments, that identifies the in-water project. And the city of Portland, the state of Oregon, and the Port of Portland are the performing parties for this in-water project, or at least the remedial design portion of it. And this is part of the Portland Harbor Superfund site, and that is overseen by EPA. So although there are two distinct projects, they're really integrally related. Decisions made on the in-water can have some significant impacts on the Upland project, and the same is true, vice versa. So what the performing parties have developed is regular coordination meetings with DEQ and EPA to ensure that these remedies for the two projects are seamless and we can implement them in collaboration with each other. So that's an important feature. So next slide. So we wanted to give you a little update on what's going on with this Upland project, and this is the one slide to do that. DEQ issued the Upland Record of Decision in March of 2021. The ROD selected alternative 4C as the final Upland remedy. The selected remedy has three main elements. Number one, it calls for the removal of highly contaminated soils to a qualified landfill, the consolidation of moderately contaminated soils to an engineered on-site containment cell, and in-place capping of residual or low-risk soil. The entire site would be covered with at least 1 foot of clean soil and maintained and monitored to ensure it is safe for people and wildlife. So DEQ also incorporated what they call a contingency option into the final remedy. The contingency option allows Metro, during remedial design and in consultation with DEQ, to perform additional removal activities to align with their final plans for the site. So under this process, Metro can eliminate or greatly reduce the volume of soil to be consolidated on site and instead transport that soil for disposal to a regulated waste facility. So the first step in the remedial design process is this pre-design or data collection. Metro and the Port of Portland are currently working on the pre-design investigation work plan. And this work plan will help us better define the locations of where the contaminated soil is. So this work plan, after approval from DEQ, will then be implemented just after the new year. So in January of 2022, we will be implementing the PDI work plan. That'll be followed by a data evaluation report. And then from there on, this remedial design process kind of mirrors everything that we are doing on the in-water side of things. The schedule objective of the Upland remedial design is for the remedial design to be completed about the same time as the in-water remedial design, which is currently targeted for early 2024. This will allow both the Upland and the in-water remedies to be implemented together at about the same time, maximizing the benefits of a coordinated project. And with that, I'm turning it back over to Josh.
Thanks, Dwight. Next slide, please. So the next topic we're going to talk about is, where are we at now and where are we headed with this project for the in-water remedial design? Next slide, please. So we've used this slide before. This is kind of a good refresher slide and a good reminder of all the pieces that go into remedial design. There isn't one single input that feeds into getting us to the endpoint of a design process. There's a number of factors that have to be considered. All of them have to be somewhat equally weighted in order to make sure we have a robust design that meets the needs of the community, EPA, and is protective over the long run. That includes the data collection, that includes engineering analysis that has to be performed, that includes thinking about scheduling and logistics. It includes, thinking about long-term monitoring during the active remedial action. The process review, which is EPA DEQ's, the technical consulting committee, and review of our documents, institutional controls to ensure the remedy stays in place and is protective over the long run. And extremely important too is the community involvement. And we'll talk about it later in this presentation, some of the aspects of community engagement we've done so far and what we're looking to do as we move into the future. Next slide, please. So I realize this slide is a little bit busy. Hopefully it's easy for people to follow despite everything that's on it. But what we really have going on is there's kind of two tracks that go on during the remedial design process. We are starting on the remedial design itself, which is the lower information, and we're doing the pre-design aspect somewhat concurrently. These timelines you'll see don't line up exactly, but it does help illustrate the fact that you do continue to collect data while you're working through your design process. So in 2020, what we completed from the pre-design process side of things was we developed a work plan to submit to EPA that listed all the data we were hoping to collect, how we plan to collect it, the methods associated with that, and then we got approval for that, which allowed us in 2020 summer and fall to implement that pre-design investigation. This pre-design investigation's goal was largely to close gaps in data, to get higher data density in order to allow us to move forward in the design process. And then after we collected all this data, the laboratories had to run the data, we had to process that data. And now in 2021, we've developed a data evaluation report, which just came back from EPA's review of the draft document in the beginning of September. So we're currently in the process of developing the final version based on EPA and their partners' comments on the document. And we will, as we develop that, we will submit it back to EPA, and once it's approved as final, our intent is to engage the community to present the data to the community, which is illustrated by this kind of blue people symbol at the top of that circle. And then we'll move into looking at the data gaps that we weren't able to close during the initial investigation that are defined both through the gaps from the actual chemical data we collected, as well as I'll talk about in a second, the bottom row, the basis of design report will identify some data gaps related to engineering design analysis. We need data to help support and close. So we'll develop a work plan once again for collecting this additional data that will close the remaining data gaps that we have at the project area. We'll submit that to EPA for approval again, and then we will implement that investigation. The plan right now is that investigation would likely occur starting roughly June or July of 2022 and continue into the fall. We have some work that we're hoping to do during higher water elevation times of year, and then the river stage will fall at some point in July, and then we'll be able to collect the remainder of our data during the lower river stage time of year. And one of the things we're looking at is a way to engage the community during this actual investigation, and more details to follow on that. And then we'll once again write an evaluation report based on that data. And then the remedial design process really has just started. We're currently writing the basis of design report. You can think of this almost as a pre-designed document. This talks through big picture concepts of considerations we need to think about as we move forward into design. And then once this document's submitted, the draft documents submittal date is December 1st of this year. And then we'll go through, once again, a review by EPA and a development of the final document. And we'll move into the remedial design work plan, which lays out all the aspects we need to do to complete design. And we'll move through that through a 30, 60, 95, and eventually 100% design that will occur between 2022 and 2024. Next slide, please. So this list isn't all encompassing of things we need to think about for 30% design, but these are some of the bigger topics we need to consider and some of the areas that are critical to understand in order to develop a design that is going to be effective and that answers the needs of the community and EPA for protective long-term at the project area. And so some of the things we need to think about are, we need to think how we're going to integrate our in-water design with the upland design, as Dwight talked about a couple slides ago. Both the Crawford Street area and the Willamette Cove area both have adjacent upland sites that have impacts historically, and they're going to have to do some work at their sites, and our design needs to mesh with the design of the upland sites in order to have a functional design that's going to last for the long run. And then transportation options, we need to think about how we're going to bring material in when we're going to cap, how we're going to take out material we dredge out of the site, how we're going to bring in other materials or remove debris that we encounter as we're doing the work. So all these type of transportation options, how we're going to do that, where we're going to place those materials, what type of containers, how we'll move it, all that's got to be thought about. We also need to consider that there is an existing cap on the east edge of our site, the McCormick and Baxter cap that's been previously placed. And our design is going to have to tie in with that, just like it would have to tie in with the upland designs. We need to consider, future site uses. This is some of the early listening sessions that we've done for the Willamette Cove and Water Group, is these future site uses and what the public is interested in from a future site standpoint. And then, transloading, how are we going to get the dredge material from the water into a container and eventually to a final resting landfill location. And then, approaches for dealing with debris and remnant structures. There is going to be a variety of that. There's historic piles there. There's an old sunken barge that's in part of the site. So these type of things, we have to think about how we're going to deal with these aspects within our project area. And again, by no means is this everything we got to think about in design, but these are some of the bigger things that are considerations and decisions we're going to have to make. Next slide, please. So Jessica Terlikowski will take over and talk through the community engagement side.
Great, thank you, Josh. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Terlikowski, and I am the community engagement coordinator for the City of Portland's community involvement program dedicated to Portland Harbor. I'm very excited to talk with you all a little bit about some of the work that has already taken place related to community engagement and how the community has been involved with the remedial design process thus far. Next slide. So one of the things that we've heard for a very long time from community members is a desire to participate more in contracting processes. And as a result of that, we worked with community to have them be involved in 3 different contracting processes. One was actually for the selection of the firm that is doing the remedial design, so GSI, Water Solutions, where Josh Bale is from. And another one was to support community involvement specific to Willamette Cove and the Roundtable, which is a group where we're looking to really engage community members to understand more about what their priorities are related to remedial design and sort of the future at Willamette Cove related to the in-water work. And community members were critical in developing the scope of work and identifying the contractor, interviewing her, and bringing her on board. And then finally, there's also been a strong desire from community and a strong priority for there to be an understanding of what possible jobs could result from the cleanup, and a request for a forecasting analysis. And so we are actually moving in that direction. Recently, had community members participate both in the development of the scope of work, as well as the interviews and conversations and the selection process for the entity who's going to be carrying that process out. And so I think we'll be sharing more about that decision probably at the next meeting. I don't think we're ready to share that as of yet. And then the other piece that I think is important is that we really collaborated with community members and community leaders to convene and create content and co-facilitate some of these community input workshops that Josh mentioned in his previous slides, where we're really looking to understand more about community priorities related to future use of the river and shoreline. And so we ask questions related to cultural practices, recreation and habitat. And thanks to the very hard work of community leaders, including Portland Harbor Community Coalition, the CAG, Portland Audubon, and Willamette Riverkeeper, as well as Human Access Project and others, we had nearly 80 community members participate in those listening sessions and share really rich feedback about what they see as important aspects related to the remedial design of the shoreline and the water. We heard feedback on a variety of different topics. And for the purposes of our time today, I'm really going to focus in on what we heard that is particularly germane to the development, I'm sorry, not to the development, to the future use and shoreline, as well as to transporting materials related to the cleanup. Next slide. So this slide provides a bit of a snapshot of what we heard from community members related to their priorities around habitat and recreation and cultural activities. The participants really underscored the importance of the remedial design teams honoring and really valuing and considering lived experience and feedback, particularly from communities of color who were coming into that space and sharing those perspectives with us. They noted that there was a number of diverse cultural groups who require river access to practice culture, including fish and water ceremonies, baptisms, as well as harvesting first foods, fishing, and canoe launches. We also heard from community members that there was a desire to have really healthy habitat there that would support both healthy peoples and cultures and wildlife. And while there was a desire expressed for recreation uses as well, it was shared that there was a desire to sort of strike a balance and really wanting to make sure that the recreation activities that were there wouldn't be motorized, but would enable would be more things like fishing and swimming and that type of thing. Next slide. We also asked questions specific to transporting materials regarding the cleanup. So this is both materials coming in and sediment moving out. And what we heard is community members had shared that they have some concerns about the duration of the project and really looking at more of the long-term impacts that could happen related to transport of materials. So thinking about, more of like the carbon impacts and overall impacts to climate versus being concerned with more of the sort of short-term, more inconveniences, thinking about examples like traffic and noise pollution and that type of thing. What came out very clearly in these conversations with folks that participated, though, is a desire to understand more about what some of the impacts could be, understanding more related to safety and carbon footprint, and also understanding a bit more about what some of the destination and routes could be. Ultimately, though, what we heard consistently is a desire to minimize any negative effects on human health and the river and the surrounding environment, as well as climate. But we also community members also had shared that they want more information, they want us to come back, they want to continue to engage in these discussions. And so, next slide. So we're actually gonna have opportunities to engage more in those discussions, to seek community input and dive into those topics a bit more. Additionally, we have these topics that are gonna be coming up for engagement over the next couple of years. If you will recall the timeline that Josh had shared earlier, and we had the little people icons that indicated where we'll be talking to folks and sharing updates and that type of thing. In addition to the sharing updates and data results and that type of thing, there's going to be an opportunity for community members to see the sampling. And we really want to hear from community about how how they want to engage with that opportunity, to use that as a learning opportunity, as a community engagement and education opportunity with other members, as well as thinking through with community members how we can approach some of these design topics that come up at the 30% design phase that have to do with everything from a possible upland transload facility to the removal of a sunken barge. So we're really looking forward to continuing these conversations, to learning from community, understanding their priorities, and really figuring out how we can integrate those priorities into the remedial design as we move forward. Next slide. And so we are excited to invite folks to join the Willamette Cove Working Group, which Alex Lopez and Jim McKenna are going to be talking with you all about shortly. We're excited to have more folks, to have the opportunity to work with more community members to co-create activities related to remedial design. We really value the input that community members bring, and really look forward to getting to collaborate more and to create some of these spaces for community to share their voices and perspectives.
So thank you so much, Jessica and Josh and Dwight so far. And then we're going to move into part 2 of the Willamette Cove updates, which is regarding the Willamette Cove Working Group, which is going to be presented by Alex Lopez with PHCC and Jim McKenna from the Oregon Governor's Office. So over to you two.
Great. Thank you very much, Annie. Appreciate it. Quick programmatic note here. Alex is busy multitasking on some priority issues right now. And so he may be able to help with the presentation towards the end, but I'll be cranking through the presentation here myself, and then tap into maybe a little bit of help from Paul Sliman at Metro, who has graciously offered to fill in for Alex at the last minute here. But we'll get through this. And then also, before I start, I just wanted to really express appreciation. I'm looking down here at the participants, and we're now up to 97 tonight. And that is so incredibly impressive. You know, much like Debbie Dietz mentioned earlier when she introduced herself, but she's been working here in Portland Harbor for almost 30 years. I have too, and on the Portland Harbor Superfund site for 20 years and years of public meetings. And there's a lot of new folks and relatively new folks involved, which is fantastic. I'm seeing some names and faces of people I've been meeting with for nearly 20 years, which is also fantastic. And I think I could definitely speak for the governor. And I think I think my public friends would support this, but Governor Brown is so appreciative of all your time and energy. She knows you're coming here on your own time. You're not compensated to be at the table. And yet so many of you have been doing it for so many years. And you've actually made this a better project for it. And I think at the end of the day, as we crank through these designs for the in-water and the upland, and we end up with a clean Willamette Cove, it's going to be a better project because of your involvement and the input you're going to be providing us over the next couple of years as we finalize these designs. So I just really want to express a thank you. Looking at the numbers here, it really is impressive. Okay, the next slide. I inserted this just as an interesting photo to throw up at the beginning of the presentation. But then when Miss Wilma Alcott spoke at the beginning with such elegance and incredible personal memories of the river, this picture brought more meaning to me. So, you know, you look at this photo, which is probably from the 1940s. I don't know the exact date, but you've got the dry dock off to the right, which was moved up to Swan Island in 1953. So we know this photo is before 1953. You got the sawmill there right along the railroad berm, and all the other industrial activities, including that sawmill that took place at the site, were gone by 1980. So, you know, the dry dock's been gone for nearly 70 years, all of their operations gone for nearly 40. Yet we definitely still have contamination. We're dealing with that legacy, and we are going to deal with it. And you've got public entities here who have stepped up, city, port, state, metro, to ensure that this cleanup occurs in a prudent way. So I want to thank Ms. Alcott for her presentation at the beginning of this meeting. And it just, like I said, brought a lot more meaning to this photo than I originally thought when I put it in here. Next slide. So we wanted, Jessica Terlikowski did a fantastic job of kind of setting up the conversation on community engagement in the previous presentation. And I just want to take this opportunity to elaborate on it a bit more. And in particular, this evolution from what was initially the Willamette Cove Roundtable, what we are now calling the Willamette Cove Working Group. So what's the history behind that? And again, this gets right to the public involvement, because this evolution is due to input we received from the public. So we started off with the roundtable, which was really grew out of community interest, working with the public entities, and was really focused on the in-water work at Willamette Cove. So the city, state, and port had stepped forward to do the design of the remedy for the sediment cleanup. And that was the focus of the roundtable. We wanted to work with the community to discuss essentially the design aspects for that sediment cleanup, and also some of the tools or concepts we could bring to the table for community benefits. And the idea was that we would take the roundtable lessons at Willamette Cove and potentially scale those up harbor-wide. What can the city, state, and port do, not just at Willamette Cove, but harbor-wide, with some of those tools and concepts related to community benefits. What we heard loud and clear from the public, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, the fact that you're all here on your own time, your own evenings, taking the time out to be at these meetings, that there were just too many meetings. We had meetings for the in-water cleanup. There were separate public meetings with the Upland cleanup. Then you got your community advisory group meetings, your Portland Harbor Collaborative meetings. It was just a bit much for you all, and we recognize that, the bandwidth issue. And so what we've done in response to the public input is we worked with the port and Metro, who are doing the Upland cleanup, and we've combined these two efforts, this community outreach. It's now the Willamette Cove Working Group, and it replaces the roundtable, and it is a conversation of both the in-water and the Upland cleanup. So the community could come together with us and see what's going on with the full picture. Again, I think the previous presentation, and in particular the slide that Dwight put up, is showing that inner relationship between the Upland cleanup and the in-water. What you do in-water affects Upland, and what you do Upland affects in-water. We think this is a much more prudent path forward for the community to hear that story as it's being developed, both the Upland and in-water design work. We've also recognized that many of the tools or concepts for community benefits, especially for public agencies, could be addressed more prudently at the Portland Harbor Collaborative level, the harbor-wide level. So I'm going to get into that a little bit more in the next slide or two about how we will dovetail the conversations at Willamette Cove to the harbor-wide work. Next slide. So this is a very similar slide to what you saw during the technical presentation, but we just wanted to highlight a couple quick things here. The red bold line around the in-water cleanup, those are the boundaries right now of our in-water design study and in-water design work. So the Port of Portland, the City of Portland, and the State of Oregon are performing that work for the in-water design under EPA oversight. If you look just to the right of that on the map, you'll see a dark hash of the gray hashed area. That's the existing McCormick and Baxter cap. So you kind of see a gerrymandering of our in-water design there, and that's because it's abutting the existing McCormick and Baxter cap that was installed, I think, upwards of 15 years ago. And then lastly, the land side, the actual upland properties, that the Port of Portland and Metro are performing the Upland design work under DEQ oversight. So, this map is just generally to show you how those all interrelate and how the Upland work and the in-water work will be addressed through the Willamette Cove working group. Next slide. What's the purpose of the working group? I've pretty much hit on most of these bullets already, but essentially we are focusing on the remedial design for both the in-water and the uplands and working with the community on that. So we want to bring you along as we're developing those designs from post-ROD to the pre-design sampling to the 30%, 60%, 90% final design work. It provides a consolidated process and opportunities for public involvement in both the in-water and upland at the same time. So you can see how those are coming together. And you could also work with us as we may hit some hurdles in how we dovetail these issues. How do we resolve those potential difficulties of designing an in-water and upland cleanup together? It facilitates the environmental justice conversation and the accountability in the remedial design and cleanup process. Again, we've heard loud and clear from the public, community groups that you want transparency. You want to be at the table. You don't want to just hear after the fact that we've done X, Y, and Z. Here's the result. You want to be involved up front and maybe inform X, Y, and Z, but also get that information in real time and in a transparent manner. And then finally, it provides a forum for discussion and development of the community benefit tools, those concepts and tools that may be specific to Willamette Cove, but also will be developed in parallel with these harbor-wide community benefits that some of the public entities may be able to bring to the table. Going to the next slide.
And hey, Jim, just a
Okay.
quick time check. We just have a couple minutes left.
Okay, we got 3 slides left. I was going to hand this one off to Paul Slyman. The one thing I did want to highlight on this slide before I hand it to Paul, because I did pull him in at the last minute, you'll see on to the left side, the community benefits bubble, and that is dashed. And the reason that is dashed is because we're still working with the community, EPA, DEQ, on how that may, in fact, evolve and be constructed and managed. So right now, that's kind of a placeholder, and we got some bullets under that of how that may be handled. But that is one where we'll be working jointly to develop. But Paul, I see you are now got your video on. You want to take it away from here and crank through the next couple slides?
Well, I will, and thank you, Jim, and I'll go quickly. Hearing Annie's caution that we should move things along. Thank you, Jim, and thank you for the 96 other people that are on this call tonight. I really appreciate it. My name is Paul Slyman. I work for Metro. I use he, him pronouns. I've been at Metro for about 10 years. You may know 2 of my colleagues that are on this call. Katie Weil, she is our site manager for the upland portion of the site at Metro, and Matan Gold. And Matan has been helping us figure out how to properly do community engagement in a meaningful way, and do it in a way that, as Jim alluded to, doesn't create a bunch more meetings for you. And that's why we're really pleased at this approach and turning the round table into this Willamette Cove working group. Just very briefly, my relationship to Willamette Cove goes back to 1989. I was in the Coast Guard and stationed in the Portland Ship Repair Yard, crawling engine rooms and double bottoms of ships, and I would run along the banks of the Willamette either after work or at lunch for years. So I know the site, I care about the site, and it's really important not only to me, but to Metro. Metro is the site owner. And for many of you, you haven't seen or heard much of us for the last 20 years or so. And for that, I apologize. Metro Council, a 7-member elected body, directed us to get more involved and understand our responsibilities as the site owner just last December. So we're sort of the new kids on the block, and I really appreciate the patience of each of you and the public members that have welcomed us to these conversations as we collectively come up to speed as an organization. We are plugged directly into that Willamette Cove working group on the executive committee, and of course we'll be on the working group as well. We are a resource agency member of this collaborative group, and it's benefited us greatly. We're learning something new every day. In the breakout session later on, for those of you who don't really know what Metro even is, I'd be happy to share a little bit more about what is Metro, because I understand that it could be very confusing. So I won't go into that now in the interest of time. Next slide, please. So the executive committee meets every 2 weeks. I would say this is an extremely collaborative committee. We rotate who's facilitating the meeting. We rotate who's the note taker. We hold each other accountable for attendance and what we said and what we didn't say. We just finalized our executive committee charter 2 weeks ago. And I think we have a group of dedicated people working on this executive committee really to ensure that the Willamette Cove Working Group gets the opportunities to sort of meaningfully engage in this work, both the in-water and upland remedial design work. I think it matters to every single member of that executive committee that we address equitable outcomes for our most impacted communities. You can see our major functions listed there on the slide. I won't go into each of them right now in the interest of time, but we are working on those. And I will say, thanks to the quick responsiveness of every member of the executive committee, and thanks to you, Ranfis, if you're on this call, for pulling us together, we have selected a time and date for our first meeting, which is October 19th at 10 a.m. And I did see in the chat, at least one person said they wanted to be on the working group. So that's great. So we know there will be at least one other person in addition to those of us on the executive. I see Jessica clapping. So we won't just be looking at each other. And of course, Ranfis just pulled this all together this afternoon. And so we will get that information out to you so that so you can get that on your calendar early. I'm just giving you sort of an advance notice now. I do believe there's one more slide. If you could forward to it, please. So the top paragraph there is directly from our charter that I mentioned. We just finalized recently. The membership includes community representatives, labor groups, the city of Portland, the port, Metro. Both Matan and I serve on this because the topics that we deal with are so broad that, and we're still coming up to speed, that frankly, it takes both of us just to manage all these. And of course, the state of Oregon is there as well. If you're interested in the working group, please reach out to any executive steering committee member or to me. I know that you can contact us through EPA or probably through Annie, and we'd be happy to talk to you about the working group and make sure that you have the information you need so that you can make a decision as to whether our October meeting is a good use of your time. We'd love to see you there if you're at all interested. I apologize, I'm not Alex. Alex would be much more eloquent in this time. And hopefully I'll see you in the breakout session if you have more questions of me or of the executive steering committee. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks,
Really
Paul.
appreciate you jumping in. I think, Annie, I think Alex might be available right now. He sent me a chat that
Perfect.
you want to chime in here real quick.
Yes, welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Paul, and thank you for your flexibility with my schedule. I know that's not ideal, but I really appreciate that. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in here at the very end to really give our ask once again. You know, we would like to see participation from a wide range of community members, but particularly these communities that are called out in our steering committee charter, the BIPOC communities with current and historical connections to the river, shelf communities that eat shellfish from the river, those communities, and supporting individuals who are living outside along the river, and anyone whose quality of life is really tied to Willamette Cove. And just what we want to do is make sure that we have a balance between community folks and agencies and within both the steering committee as well as the larger working group. So Paul mentioned it before, but we have preliminarily scheduled the first working group meeting for October 19th from 10 to 11:30 a.m. And I would just really encourage anyone, particularly from the community side, who's interested in participating in either the executive steering committee or the broader working group to just let one of us know on the steering committee that you're interested. So once again, thank you so much for accommodating my schedule, Paul and Jim, and thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you, Alex, Paul, and Jim. Great updates and lots of information for people to digest and think about. And